Hello and welcome to PFF Fantasy Football Podcast Team Preview Edition. I'm your host, Ian Hartitz, and time to talk some Carolina Panthers. Not exactly coming off the best season, but you know what? We've all had down years in life. Why can't the Panthers have one? Joining me, as always, none other than Dwain "The Rock" McFarland. Dwain, I said you were great. Dwain the Great last time. Now you're back to The Rock. I kind of prefer that.
Well, at least I wasn't like to average, Dwayne the average. So I'll take The Rock over the average.
Dwain mediocre McFarland. No, I didn't mean it. As always on these team previews, we're going to run through some of the coaching changes, then look at the player personnel moves before going deep into the quarterback, running back, wide receiver, and tight end positions. Thank you guys as always for tuning in. Let's get after it. Head coach Matt Corral is back for another go-round. I mean, yeah, when you get the guy 6 years, $60 million, and he's had like a cup of coffee in the NFL, you got to try to make it look like you didn't make the worst decision in recent, I guess we had the Urban Meyer hire, so not the worst coaching decision in recent memory, not looking particularly great though at the moment. Luckily, they brought in Ben McAdoo to run the offense. McAdoo spent 2020 as the Jaguars quarterback coach. Most recent experience calling plays at the professional level. Was back as the offensive coordinator and later head coach of the Giants from 2014 to 2017. So, Dwain, when we look at these Giants years, we saw, as you know, I love going back to our Madden playbook analogy, kind of like a pass-balanced offense here with actually pretty good pace. That was the part that surprised me. So in terms of their non-garbage time pass play rates from 2014 and 2017, they were 22nd, 17th, 25th, and 11th. So maybe a little bit more average to run balance, but the pace was actually something that surprised me in a good way. 13th, 4th, first and third in situation neutral pace per the fine folks at Football Outsiders. So I think a lot of this, was maybe going hand in hand with Eli Manning. We see sometimes those veteran quarterbacks really have more control over the offense than the actual offensive coordinator or play caller. And obviously the drop off from Eli to either Sam Darnold or Matt Corral cannot be overstated enough. But at a minimum, Dwain, we have seen McAdoo be willing to move at a pretty fast pace on offense and at least for 1 year employ a top 12 unit in being a pass happy group.
Yeah. I mean, I think the coaching thing, for this team is like kind of just secondary to me. Like, yeah. And I love looking at the coaching stuff. It's like, what the hell's going to happen with quarterback? But yes, with McAdoo, I think there are some bright spots. I think people immediately, when they heard about McAdoo, it was just kind of like, okay, what are they doing? Why are we just retreading this same, old coach? But McAdoo in his time was trying to do some cool things that really wasn't, the in vogue, right? Thing to be doing in the league whenever he first took over for the Giants, including just how often he used 11 personnel. He was willing to use a lot of receivers. You talked about him being up tempo, being willing, to your point, being more of a pass balance probably is about where you would put it, but in games, if he needed to be pass heavy, he would, but not an offense that has a lot of motion and different things like that. So there's some other things he still needs to integrate into his game. You can't just come out there these days and be static, especially if you've got quarterback challenges, with Sam Darnold, or if you're going to start a rookie in Matt Corral. Like, you need to do as much as you can ahead of the snap to try to tip off what's going to happen with the quarterback, and also what that does immediately in those first, in that first millisecond post snap, just giving them the easiest read that you can, getting your playmakers like DJ Moore involved. I'm hoping that we see more of that, because really McAdoo's offense before was more kind of like what we've seen with Kellen Moore with Dallas. More of a, hey, Dak, you've got three good weapons, just drop back and read it, which isn't bad. Like, if you've got three really good options and you've got three really good weapon, a really good quarterback, like, that can work. But with a guy like Sam Darnold or a guy like Matt Corral, like, I think you've got to get a little bit more creative. You've got to do some of the things that some of the other schemers in the league, like the Shanahans, and even what we saw, Brian DeBoll do for Josh Allen, that kind of just unlocked him and really got him on a heater. Like, I want to see McAdoo do some of those things. But overall, I think it's neutral to a slight upgrade, for the Panthers offense moving to McAdoo.
Some of the player moves this offseason. Quarterback Cam Newton remains an unrestricted free agent. One of my favorite moments of last year was when he got re-signed. He comes in, scores a touchdown immediately, yells "I'm back" into the camera, throws a touchdown the next drive. Panthers upset the Cardinals. And then basically everything went south. Just wasn't good as a passer. And ultimately, 33 years of age, very well could have started his final game in the NFL. So as a longtime Cam stan, disappointing. We'll see what happens the rest of his career. Over at running back, Ameer Abdullah signed with the Raiders. Sneaky significant, man. Like, for everyone that's really been in the weeds of fantasy football like we have over the years, that Ameer Abdullah first was really a thorn in the side of Alexander Madison as a handcuff. And then last year really was taken over for Chuba Hubbard down the stretch. Now, a lot of that was because Abdullah was the pass down back and Panthers were finding themselves in one trailing game script after another. But either way, like removing him from the picture, it helps Hubbard and D'Onta Foreman, the next player that we're going to talk about, who signed a 1-year, $2 million contract with the Panthers. That includes $940,000 guaranteed. Foreman did a pretty good middle-class man's impression of Derrick Henry last year for the Titans. Does seem to be fully recovered coming off that early career Achilles tear. Might just be CMC's new preferred handcuff. More on that in a bit. At wide receiver, punt returner Alex Erickson signed with Washington, and they replaced him with Andre Roberts. And the only other significant move was signing Rashard Higgins to a 1-year, $1.1 million deal, presumably to compete with Brandon Zylstra, maybe, just maybe, Terrence Marshall as well. Also made a splash in the draft of sorts by taking Ole Miss quarterback Matt Corral at the end of the third round. Plenty of concerns about Corral in terms of his ability to run a pro-style offense, but that value compared to where, some people thought teams might be reaching in the first or even second, certainly hard to be hitting on. So any of these moves really stick out to you, Dwayne? To me, the Foreman and kind of Abdullah signings, or the release of Abdullah and the decision to sign Foreman. My goodness, I'm sorry, people. To me, that sticks out the most.
Yeah, that's the big one. I mean, I know a couple years ago we had some folks in the community, and even I think he had shown flashes with Higgins, coming over at receiver. But I think at this point, like, it's just a dude, And I mean, when you really look at, the Panthers, they've kind of backed themselves into this situation. It's not like they have a lot of draft capital. It's not like they had a lot of ability to move around and make trades. They kind of had to, just make a few small tweaks here and there. But yeah, I think Foreman is definitely the biggest move, just because we know with CMC, not to say that because you've been injured, you're always going to be injured, but we've seen that be a role, right? That's come through with Mike Davis 2 years ago. And then last year, obviously, it didn't necessarily come down to one guy, but we did see Chuba Hubbard for a little stretch get some of the work until, to your point, Abdullah started working in more. So, yeah, I think Foreman, is really the big move there. And I don't know if the offense is going to change that much. I think we've got to figure out, some of the pecking orders, but, some of it's pretty well solved.
Let's talk some quarterback. We got Sam Darnold, Matt Corral, XFL Hall of Famer PJ Walker in the quarterback room there. Looks like Sam Darnold will get the first crack. At the same time, it does seem to be a fairly open competition between him and Matt Corral at this point. Going into last year, Dwayne, I love having you here. Like, I used to just be doing these solo episodes, like previewing, and sometimes, I just go on these rants and I wouldn't even know if... I felt like I was getting caught up in the moment sometimes. And Sam Darnold was one of those guys because I couldn't wrap my mind around him being such a breakout candidate when it wasn't like he was average with the Jets. Like, he was terrible, and the people that thought an improved surrounding cast and coaching staff could take him from terrible to like legitimately good in 1 year. That was the part I rejected. Maybe from terrible to average or below average, but this idea that he'd be this breakout guy, hey, it looked okay for the first 3-4 weeks of the year, and I saw plenty of people get their victory laps in, kind of fell down short after that. And by kinda, I mean, holy shit, he was bad for the rest of the entire regular season. He did get concussed and then hurt his shoulder in week 9 against the Patriots. At the same time, though, we had plenty of evidence before then to see that not much changed with Darnold. It's like that Scooby-Doo meme where they rip off the mask of the criminal. Like, Panthers Sam Darnold, still very much Jets Sam Darnold. 41st among 44 quarterbacks in PFF passing grade, 40th in QB rating, 26th in big-time throw rate, 35th in turnover-worthy play rate, 36th in yards per attempt, 28th in adjusted completion rate. I want to say two nice things about him. One, they had a fourth and 4 from their own end zone against the Vikings, like fourth and ball game. He threw a seed down the middle to, I believe, Ian Thomas. It was like one of the best throws of the season. Like, he has some crazy arm talent sometimes, and that one throw was fantastic. That's all I got there. And then he can also run the ball well sometimes. This dude had 5 rushing touchdowns in the first 4 weeks of the year. I'm pretty sure he was leading the entire NFL in rushing touchdowns for the first 4 weeks. The problem, Dwayne, is it's one throw, and we can't rely on a quarterback because of one good throw he made in an entire freaking season. And then as far as the rushing stuff, like, yeah, he does seem to have a little bit of a nose for the end zone. Even with the Jets, like, I still barely believe that like 40-yard touchdown he had against the Broncos happened. That was very athletic, and the fact Darnold pulled that off, it continues to surprise me to this day. But when you look at Darnold last year, man, he still wasn't even putting up big numbers in terms of his ability to run the ball. I think only in 3 times last year he even reached 20 rushing yards per game. So there's no rushing floor. We've seen the passing at this point, and like, I don't think McAdoo is going to fix this. Is there any reason to believe, Dwayne, that 25-year-old Sam Darnold is going to be anything other than what we've seen the last 5 years?
I just don't see how at this point. I mean, just below average in everything, to bad, across the board. His completion percentage, has been 58, 62, 60, and 60%. Like the league average is 65%. Yards per attempt, 6.9, 6.9, 6.1, 6.2. NFL average is 7.3. Touchdowns per attempt, the NFL average is 4.8%. He's never even gotten to average. 4.3% is his highest. Last year he was at 2.2%. Interceptions per attempt, 2.2% is the average. He's been over that every year of his career. So, I mean, it just kind of backs up some of the things you were talking about, some of the other underlying, data points. PFF passing grade has gone down from a 64.3 to a 52.7, and last year a 54.4. I mean, those are really bad grades. So I don't see how it's going to happen, for Sam Darnold at this point. He did salvage, a few fantasy points because he, ended up with the 5 rushing touchdowns. Last season, where in his career he's had the 1, the 2, and 2. So, I mean, he basically, more than doubled what he had seen as far as a career high before. And has never played 16 games, 13, 13, 12, and 12. So, I mean, man, like, talk about really pinning your hopes on someone like Corral. Like, this is the team that I think, I don't know if they can get anything done because what we talked about earlier, it's not like they have a ton of resources. I don't have like their future draft capital like pulled up in front of me right now, but do they really want to make the same kind of mistake they made with Darnold, like going after Baker, or are they so gun shy after what happened with Darnold? Because I do think that Baker's better than Sam Darnold, right? So, I mean, I feel like this is the team if they were going to make a move for Garoppolo or make a move for Baker Mayfield, like Carolina has to be it. I just don't know if they can get it done, and I don't know if they have the stomach to make that kind of deal.
This is my point, not to harp on the same shit with Baker, but like Baker's best chance at playing a high level of football in 2022 is on the Browns. If he comes to Carolina, he's going to get killed behind that offensive line. He doesn't have enough better receiving weapons to make a big difference. Like, man, if there's any way they can just avoid starting Jacoby Brissett for 17 games, I would really encourage them to do that. Nothing against Jacoby. He's a great backup quarterback, but he's exactly that, a backup quarterback. In regards to Matt Corral, PFF wrote the following about him in our 2022 NFL Draft Guide. Where he wins distributing, Corral is at his best when playing point guard, distributing the ball quickly and swiftly to all levels of the field. NFL offensive coordinators will take advantage of his timing and accuracy in the RPO and quick passing game. What's his role? Playbook opener. Corral has serious tools that any offensive coordinator would love to try and mold. He also needs some serious molding, though. He's a project who needs to learn behind a veteran early in his career. Where he can improve, touch. Corral is hardly asked to run drop-back passing concepts at Ole Miss. He's exceptional on simple rhythm concepts and RPOs, but when asked to expand his vision and identity, where to go with the ball, his play suffers. That last point, Dwain, is what was interesting to me hearing, the quarterback experts of the world and evaluating these guys, because Corral, it seemed like he did everything he was asked to do very well, but because some guys like Ritter were actually using more pro-style concepts in their offense, even if they weren't great at it, it seems like Corral, even though he wasn't asked to do much of it, is being penalized a lot for the things that, again, he wasn't even asked to do. And some of the research that Kevin Cole did, I think one of the bigger supporters of Matt Corral, did show just how efficient he was at everything he was asked to do. He does have that fantasy-friendly rushing floor we're looking for, 506 rushing yards and 4 touchdowns in 2020, and then 614 and 11 scores in 2021. The dude ran for 195 yards against Tennessee. Like, there is a legit enough rushing floor here to think that he has the tools to be a potential better fantasy quarterback than real life. But man, Darnold wasn't able to do this in this offense. This is PFF's reigning 31st ranked offensive line. Not saying they won't make a step forward, but again, I want to be careful taking a unit that was 31st and assuming they're going to be anything better than maybe below average. So we got DJ Moore. That's about it. I mean, I hope McCaffrey's healthy, but I don't even know if McCaffrey is necessarily like a quarterback's best friend, man. Like, you could argue that a passing game shouldn't be, such a focus through your running back. So with Matt Corral, I don't hate the prospect, but when I'm hearing that he's going to need time to develop, it doesn't look like he's going to have that. And there is a big question mark about how he's going to transition into more of a pro style offense. I just don't think we can get behind him in fantasy this year. Maybe if he's balling out, yeah, okay, we'll look at the waiver wire. As we talked about with Desmond Ridder, like, we're not writing off any of these quarterbacks yet, but in terms of probabilities, in terms of just trying to put our chips on the right player, I do not think neither Darnold nor Corral are those guys, pal.
Yeah, I don't really think there's anything to add there. The only thing I'll say, like, I feel like Corral, like, had he actually weighed more, I think some teams were just scared off by the weight, and worrying, can he take the beating, of an NFL quarterback, which obviously isn't like what the beating of an NFL quarterback used to be. So, I mean, maybe if his weight is what pushed him down and like these natural traits can all like come to the surface, he could eventually challenge Darnold this year, but it's not something that, I'm betting on. At the end of the day, like Darnold's probably going to play bad enough that Corral's going to have to play either way, whether he's ready or not. If Carolina can't get something else done at quarterback. But yeah, I don't think there's anything to do from a fantasy perspective here as far as rostering anyone, from this quarterback room.
Christian McCaffrey, the all-time leader in PPR points per game among every running back to ever play a snap in the NFL. Shout out Pro Football Reference for having that data at our disposal. Yeah, has only played 10 games since Matt Corral took over as Panthers head coach. Here are his fantasy finishes in the 8 games where he was not injured significantly early. RB2, RB5, RB2, RB1, RB3, RB15 when he played 49% of the snaps in a freaking just got killed by the Patriots. Like terrible game. And he finished as the RB15, comes back RB4 and RB3. Like he's playing a different position, Dwain. We can talk about, hey, he's getting injured. They're going to dial back his workload. Like we kind of saw them do it at the end of the year, at least for a snap or two. In week 10, after that Patriots game, they played him on 59% of the offensive snaps. He only had 13 carries. He also caught 10 freaking passes for 66 yards. Like McCaffrey is playing like a different game than everyone else in regards to fantasy football because he's the only running back at this stage, especially with the Kamara suspension stuff going on, who has a chance to legitimately catch 100 passes. As we've talked about, one target historically is equal to about 2.7 carries in terms of expected fantasy points. So, my God, if we get more of an Austin Eckler role where they just focus using him more as a receiver, that's great. I don't think it's even going to impact his ceiling that much. Maybe it does, but his ceiling's already ahead of any running back in NFL history. We can afford to go down a little bit and still be more than fine. Will he stay healthy? He suffered 5 injuries since 2020. In September, it was a right high ankle sprain. He missed 6 games. In November, sprained AC joint, missed 4 games. December, strained thigh, missed another 4 games. 2021 in September, he strained his hamstring. He missed 5 games. In November, he sprained his ankle. He missed 5 games. I'm not going to sit here and just assume he's going to get hurt more so than anyone else, Dwain. He's healthy right now. Dr. Edwin Porras noted that the best 2022 comp for McCaffrey as it relates to health is Austin Eckler, who was coming off a previous hamstring injury. Porras basically said the high ankle and AC injuries more so incidental and should not follow him into the future. So for me, Dwain, McCaffrey, like he's still Christian McCaffrey. And I think everyone that says that, oh, I'm not drafting him this year, he burned me in the past, they're probably not actually doing drafts or making ranks right now because you're going to be awfully hard pressed to rank anyone other than Jonathan Taylor ahead of him. I'm fine putting Kupp, Jefferson, Chase there. But once I get to pick 105 and McCaffrey's on the board, I'm taking him.
Yeah, it's just really tough. I broke it down a little bit differently than you, but kind of the same things, looking at the utilization last year. So in the games where he saw at least just 50% of the snaps, because he had games where he got knocked out, he scored 27.7, 24.7, 26.1, and 24.9 PPR points. Like, so you can try as hard as you want, to suppress Christian McCaffrey and to put the injury propaganda out there. And yes, he has been hurt, but like, here's the problem with it. The upside is clearly there. Everything is risk reward, right? So the thing is with McCaffrey, if you want to take the swing and let's say that there is some additional risk from injury, which we've actually had different doctors say that there's really not like this additional risk for him at this point. It's not like he's like a 30-year-old running back. He's not. But the reward can be so high because he can be a 25-point per game type player, even in a partial role. He got to 89% or more of the snaps in 2 of those games. And the other 2 games, he was 59% and 71%. And to your point, he actually put up more in one of those games, 26.1, than the one where he had 70% of the snaps, 24.7. So, and man, his target share in those 4 games, 27% of the targets went to Christian McCaffrey.
So he's playing a different position than the other running backs because of that target share.
Yeah, it's insane. It really is insane. It's on a complete, it's just on a different level. So yeah, with McCaffrey, and if you're listening to this and you haven't been drafting, like, and you don't think you're going to take McCaffrey or you don't want to worry about him because you think he's going to be injured, unless you pull like a first 3 pick, you don't have to worry about it because he'll be gone. He'll be gone whenever you pick. The furthest I saw CMC fall to 5 once, but I've also seen it. I've seen him go 1. It might have been 6, and maybe it was you. I can't remember, but I've seen him go 1-1. I've seen him go 1-2, seen him go 1-3. Typically, he's a first 3 pick off the board right now on Underdog. He's a top 3 pick typically right now over on the FFPC. So just get ready. And it doesn't mean you have to take him. But again, the upside really is there. The problem with passing on McCaffrey is, even as much as we love Justin Jefferson and as much as we may love Cooper Kupp to put up another, to do what he did last year, like it's so much harder for him to do it than for McCaffrey, right? Justin Jefferson, yeah, we love him, but he's never come anywhere close to being a 23, 25 point per game player, right? As much as we like him and we know that eventually he's going to have a blow. Justin Jefferson will get one season in his career where he'll probably do that, and he'll probably have several where he's around 20, just over 20. He's a really good player. But again, getting the pass catching back like McCaffrey, like, man, it's so hard. I did my top 150 today. I put CMC 2. Like I've got Jonathan Taylor 1, I've got CMC 2, then I've got Justin Jefferson, Cooper Kupp, Jamar Chase, Austin Eckler. That's my top 6. And it's just so hard because when you go back and you start looking at what Christian McCaffrey has done, points per game, and we share all the cool underlying data points and all that. But at the end of the day, just like listen to his points per game over his career. Second year, 24 points per game. Third year, 29.3 fantasy points per game. Fourth season, 30.1. That's insane. That's nuts. That is nuts. And then last year, to be out there, in those games where he had at least the 50%, and I already gave you those numbers. So, like, we're talking about a guy that if he doesn't get hurt, like, it's going to take a miracle, basically, for him to not be a 23 to 25 point per game player. Here's the thing. If he's healthy all season, he's going to outscore Jonathan Taylor. Like, it's not, I don't even know if it'll be close. Like, he will be the number 1 fantasy football asset.
If they had just done anything to help the quarterback or done more for the offensive line, which I understand. They used the number 6 overall pick to get their tackle. That's great. They signed Austin Corbett in free agency, Bradley Bozeman in free agency. They should be better. But again, going from 31st up there, and I do think offensive line's overrated. And we've seen McCaffrey be on terrible offenses and put up these numbers, but it just would be a lot nicer if we had, I don't know, maybe not the single worst surrounding cast, or at least a bottom 5 surrounding cast.
It's just what you said, though, Ian, because he's playing a different position, man. Like he circumvents all of that because of how good he is in the receiving game.
He sure does. It's
it's like I don't want to rank him there. Like I've tried to suppress Christian McCaffrey. I can't. I can't do it.
I don't think it's possible. I don't think a rational, objective person can rank him out of the top 5 in terms of just overall. And
here's the thing.
It might be number 2.
You can't, if he's healthy, you can't argue that any other player has a higher ceiling. Yeah. If they're all 5 guys we have in our top 5 are healthy, like how many times does Christian McCaffrey finish first out of 100 simulations? Probably 100, man. As
much as I want to dismiss the potential for guys to get injured, he is older than these guys, save for Kupp, but plays a different position. And
26, though. Not nuts.
Guys that get injured do, I think there is a trend of them probably getting injured a little more frequently again. I'm just saying, man, like, why not put him straight up ahead of Jonathan Taylor then? Clearly something held you back from doing that. It held me back from doing that too. Part
of that is just because, like, if you're going to draft multiple times, like, if you want Jonathan Taylor, you have to use the 1-1 or you don't get him, right? So basically, that's the way I'm looking at JT. The tiebreaker goes to ADP. But like, man, on upside, here's what I will say. If I, for some reason, let's say like you and I went in together and we signed up, and we may do this. We signed up for, say, 12 Football Guys Players Championship drafts over at FFPC. And let's say we went ahead and drew our draft position today, and all of a sudden, like, we're so excited, it all comes back, and it's like, you guys drew the number 1 pick 12 times. We wouldn't take Jonathan Taylor 12 times.
No.
We would split that up. Like the guy I bet you that we would roster the most after Jonathan Taylor in that spot would be CMC.
I don't think you're wrong, Dwain. I don't think.
Look, man, I was doing the research on him, and I'd already done some, but it's just like these numbers are bonkers, And again, I'm like you. I'm like, well, he's probably going to be more likely to get injured. But then I look at the 3 years before, 16, 16, and 16 games, and he was basically in those years. Talk about a workload. 91%, 93% of the snaps in year 2 and year 3. I mean, the dude never left the field, and was doing that. So, you look at his rushing attempts, over the course, of his career, he's sitting at 781. We tack on, the receptions. You may already have something handy waiting to say about this, Ian, but 358 receptions,
Jesus.
so he's not anywhere near the 1,500 touch mark, even if we want to include his receptions, and he's only going to be 26. I mean, the guy was 21 when he was rookie. He came in really young. So it's like, I think he's a year or two away from just feeling like we're going to be so worried about his touches or the age cliff. And again, the upside is just clearly there, with his points per game. So, I mean, I'll quit like fawning all over, CMC, but I probably didn't give him enough credit early in the offseason. And now I'm just staring at this stuff and I'm like, I don't know how you suppress CMC. Can't hold him back.
I said CMC over Jonathan Taylor back in March, but again,
I know you did.
When they didn't do anything, not a single thing to help him out, just like Chicago, basically. I do think that the days of him getting 90% snaps are over, but with the amount of receptions, it might not matter. I guess the one argument, man, look, we're talking, he's the RB2 for sure. We're not putting anyone ahead of him running back wise, but when we look at McCaffrey against Chase, against Jefferson, against Kupp, do you think McCaffrey's potential outcomes are more volatile enough to just take the top 5 wide receiver?
It's just hard because he has so much cushion built in. We talked about these point per games, 29 and 30. And then, looking at last year, how he's basically getting 25 in the games he's healthy. So let's say he takes a downturn and that turns into 22. That's still more than what most receivers can do. That's still more than what you can project most receivers to do in a season. It's just really hard as a receiver to get to those numbers, which is why you take the chance, on CMC. Look, I did a Football Guys Players Championship draft last week, and I took Cooper Kupp at 2 and let CMC go at 3. And so, I mean, I'm fine. I'm fine doing it.
It's a tier. It's a tier, I think, with those receivers and McCaffrey.
Yeah, I'm fine doing it and mixing it in if you're worried about McCaffrey's, injuries. I think it's fine, to mix them in. But I think, you just can't dismiss what the guy's done. So I also will have plenty of teams where I just go CMC at 2.
In 2019, if McCaffrey had 0 rush attempts, he would have been the PPR RB12.
He's stupid.
He might catch more passes than those wide receivers.
Oh, I think he will.
It could happen.
I think it's he and DJ Moore. That's it. We like Robbie. Robbie's a good NFL player.
Half point standard. Are we taking the wide receivers?
Oh man, I think it's just in any format with how many points CMC scores, it's tough. You might argue. No, I don't think you can, man, to be honest. Because I'm also just looking at his receiving yards.
Yeah.
He's had a 1,000-yard receiving season. He's had an 875-yard receiving season. Even if they cut his rushing workload in half, like you mentioned, and he rushes for 600 yards and he gets, 900 to 1,000 yards receiving and he scores 10 touchdowns, and 80 catches, it's just going to be so hard, to outscore CMC.
God, I just hope he's the same guy. I don't know why he wouldn't be the same guy coming back from these injuries. Again, we're not talking about even an ACL or Achilles situation, just some ankle sprains and a hamstring strain here and there. But just seeing him in his heyday in 2018, 2019, man, the volume was great. And he was just moving at a different speed. Just the things he can do as a route runner and him flipping over the Jaguar dude into the end zone.
Listen to this. Last year, yards per route run, 2.91, obviously on a smaller sample, but that's a career record. Targets per route run, 34%. That's a career record. Yards per target, 8.6, career record. Yards per reception, 9.3, career high. And the guys have had an 8.8 and an 8.7 already on his resume. Yeah. They're just the underlyings don't show any other sort of decline other than the fact that he missed snaps. His efficiency, is still there. If you look at his explosive rush rate, how we talk about Zeke has kind of been zapped and some of these other guys, 15% of his plays went for 10 yards or more on the ground. The NFL average is 10.5. The guy's 4.5% above the league average in explosive rush rate. So, look, everything you look at, missed tackles forced, he's right at the league average, explosive rush rate, he's above, yards after contact, he's actually above the league average. I can't find a hole in the guy's game, to be honest.
And that's, Dwayne, unless you just want to say, he'll get hurt and just end the discussion.
You know what? That's why people do it. I think because once you look at this, you realize there's no other way to argue this other than to just dismiss it with injury. The problem is his upside. Again, his upside is so huge that if we talk a lot, and I know it's a high pick. You're picking, like in the top 5 picks to take CMC. But we talk all the time about, well, if I don't take this guy, am I really going to regret it? And even as high as he's going, you could regret it. CMC could be so good, even at pick 2, that it could be enough, like just to help that person win the whole league, even though you're spending a high pick on him because of how good he can be. So it's just, and it's tough to say that about players that go in the top 3, where you're like, if I don't have him, like I could have this alternate that's one spot behind him, and I'm going to regret not having CMC. I think, there's a case that you could really regret not having CMC.
By week 2 last year, everyone was like, all right, whoever got McCaffrey is going to win your fantasy league. And then he got hurt and everyone came out of the weeds and was able to take that not well-earned victory lap. But okay, I think we've, I know
we've done there's not much else on Carolina, so.
All right, that's good. No, okay. Looking at behind McCaffrey, let's say you do think McCaffrey's going to get hurt. I do think D'Onta Foreman is going to be the late round target to have. I was looking around trying to find some notes on Panthers OTAs, or if there's just been some words on if they already consider Foreman to be ahead of Chuba Hubbard. And best thing I could find was that they were describing him as a bigger and more physical complement to McCaffrey and Hubbard. So I guess that's the catch here. I don't think this is a situation where if McCaffrey gets hurt, we're going to see Foreman completely take over, but he is a 233-pound bowling ball that I think is just objectively the better football player than Chuba Hubbard, particularly as a rusher. You can pick any metric from last year, yards per carry, missed tackles forced per carry, yards after contact per carry. You're going to see Foreman was a superior guy, and that contract, $2 million, it's not a lot, but we saw James Conner get similar money last year and proceeded to get a pretty damn good workload for himself. So Hubbard, again, he lost out to Amir Abdullah, who wasn't even on the team to start the season last year. I just am not confident enough in Chuba to go with him as the preferred handcuff. It's not a ringing endorsement of D'Onta Foreman, but Dwayne, if we can potentially get Christian McCaffrey's handcuff in round 16 or later, yeah, I'm fine throwing a dart at that.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think, Foreman's the guy to have. And my guess is he would pick up the majority of the rushing work. I think it's just up to Hubbard if he could be the passing down back or not. And right. I think it's kind of on him. And if he can't, I think that does mean that Foreman could potentially be a 65 to 70% snap guy if they don't gain confidence, in Chuba. Chuba had the 19% targets per route run last year, which is not bad. Like it's not great for a running back, but I mean, looking at, an RB1, like he's just under that. An RB1, over the last 3 years has averaged 20% targets per route run. He was right at 19%, which is above what you see from like your RB3s or your average NFL running back. So he was above average, like as far as his targets per route run. Yards per route run, nothing like, McCaffrey, like a 0.98, whereas McCaffrey's over a 2. So, I mean, I think that's probably like the way I'm, that's the way I'm leaning right now with my projections, is kind of having Hubbard. If Hubbard is really, there to help spell McCaffrey a little bit, maybe as a receiver, Foreman's there to really spell him more as a rusher. If CMC goes down and all things work out perfect for both guys, it's probably, 50 to 60% to Foreman, 20, 30% to Hubbard, and then like somebody else like working in, would be my guess.
Foreman, RB59, and Hassan Haskins at RB61 have been two of my favorite guys to draft at the end. Because, hey, you're looking at Henry McCaffrey handcuffs that are essentially free at the end of your drafts. If you yourself want to go take advantage of that, head on over to Underdog Fantasy. Their Best Ball Mania tournament has $10 million in total prize money. And the best part is you just draft your fantasy football team, and that's it. No waivers, no trades, no in-season management. Underdog gives you your best score each week of the season and the highest scores at the end of the year when the champion of Best Ball Mania last year drafted in June. So there's no time like the present to join Underdog and take your shot at $1 million draft. If you do not already have an account, please sign up, and Underdog will double your first deposit up to $100 when you sign up with the promo code PFF. And also, if you play just 10 of those dollars using promo code PFF, you get a free PFF subscription. So what are you waiting for? Head on over to UnderdogFantasy.com or the App Store, play $10 with code PFF, and draft your Best Ball Mania team today. Also want to give a shout out to our friends over at FanDraft. Are you holding an in-person fantasy football draft party this year? Then you need to check out FanDraft.com. FanDraft is a modern, digitalized version of those old sticker boards we used to use at our drafts. However, unlike those outdated sticker boards, FanDraft makes your fantasy draft feel like the actual NFL draft with features such as custom logos, draft clock, team walk-up songs, a streaming news ticker, and much more. FanDraft works by running your league's draft from the FanDraft.com website and then exporting your display onto a large screen TV for a league to enjoy. It can also be used fully online. Any number of your league owners can join the draft remotely. So sign up for a free trial account at FanDraft.com. When you're ready to order the pro account, make sure you use promo code PFF to save 50% off your purchase. That's FanDraft.com with code PFF. We have one more exciting player to talk about to an extent, DJ Moore. I think he is the best pick for this generation's Allen Robinson, who is last generation's Andre Johnson, of just unfortunately having to deal with one shitty quarterback after the other. Shout out Terry McLaurin also on this unfortunate list. But dude, it really is just so brutal for DJ Moore. And it even goes back to college, man, the things he did at Maryland. Like one of the big talking points about DJ coming out was the fact he put up great numbers as a senior at Maryland, despite playing with, I think, 4 different quarterbacks. So here's the list. Not safe for work, obviously, but in college, DJ Moore, his quarterbacks: Perry Hills, Caleb Rowe, Shane Cockerill, Dax Garman, Tyler Pigromi, Max Bortenschlager, Ryan Brand, Kasem Hill. I've legitimately never heard of any of those guys. I consider myself I will put a shitty Big 10 game on ahead of the good Big 12 game because I'm just a Midwestern boy. I have not heard of those guys. NFL. Injured Cam Newton, Taylor Heineke, Kyle Allen, Garrett Gilbert, Will Grier, Teddy Bridgewater, PJ Walker, and Sam Darnold. Teddy Bridgewater is the best quarterback that DJ Moore has ever gotten to play with. That is how bad he's been running. Unfortunately, I'm not sure that a rookie year version of Matt Corral is essentially going to help that. Dwayne, the underlying stuff is great. Moore has still commanded targets. He still managed to put up great yards per route run numbers. I mean, just looking at that specifically, he still emerged as a top 25 receiver. Since he came to the NFL, he's 20th in yards per route run. He's 23rd in targets per route run, 24th in PFF receiving grade. The problem is, man, it's just these quarterbacks. Last year, nobody had more incomplete targets that were deemed the quarterback's fault than DJ Moore. He was also my number 2 most unlucky. The best season, basically, with Teddy Bridgewater, in my analysis, only Jerry Jeudy was more unlucky than DJ Moore that year in terms of what they were working with in terms of a target perspective. So the question, Dwayne, I think we all agree that DJ Moore is a top 20, hell, maybe even a top 12 receiver, if he had a good quarterback, but he doesn't. And then we start looking at his production. 2018, he was the wide receiver 54 in PPR points per game. 2019, he was wide receiver 17. 2020, wide receiver 28. And last year, wide receiver 27. Why is it going to be different this year? And why should we prioritize Moore ahead of a bunch of other guys in this muddled wide receiver 2 range?
It's just you're betting on his underlying profile, but yeah, it's a struggle because of the quarterbacks. He's a wide receiver 1. His underlying data points say he's a wide receiver 1. Yep. But to your point, but that's why he doesn't rank as a wide receiver 1. We've got him below that. So to me, it's he's just a guy that ends up in limbo, right? You can never make him a wide receiver 1 because his situation's not good enough. It's hard to push him all the way down to wide receiver 3 territory because he's a badass, So he's just stuck between those two things. And so it's a tough spot to be for him. Overall, if you look at the points per game averages since 2011 for wide receivers 13 through 24, he's still scoring in those ranges. If we're just benchmarking it by what wide receiver 14 or 15 or 16 or 17 score, he's been where he's consistent. He's right around a 19 to 21 kind of guy, a 19 to 22. Which I think about where he goes this year. I wish we had, better news, to share with people that, something was going to change for him as far as his quarterback. And maybe they will make a move. And, even if they just got Baker or even if just got Jimmy G, it's I would probably be excited enough about, DJ Moore just to bump him up again.
That's how sad this is, man. We're praying for Baker.
It is sad. It is sad. But I think the one thing with Moore, to give him credit, is that despite how terrible his quarterbacks have been, he still managed to be that mid-range to low-end, wide receiver 2, if you're looking at, the benchmark averages over time. Yeah, the problem is you don't get, you're not getting a guy where you probably see the ceiling, right, of a 22-point season because he just doesn't have the offense to really support that.
Here's the interesting thing when we start looking at this wide receiver 2 range. I have Michael Pittman ahead of him. I trust Matt Ryan more, and I think their target share opportunity and talent profiles are similar. I will take Terry McLaurin ahead of him. I think Carson Wentz would be the best quarterback DJ Moore has played with somehow. I would take Mike Williams ahead of him. I would put DJ Moore at wide receiver 16 ahead of Metcalf. Ahead of Deontay Johnson, I'm more worried about Pickens/Claypool and some of those other guys. Ahead of Jalen Waddle, ahead of Marquise Brown, even ahead of the Broncos. So I'm not out on DJ Moore. I think that's about where he's going on underdog. But
where does that put him for you?
Wide receiver 16.
Okay.
16.
Yeah. So I mean, I have him 17 right now, but I'm with you. I've got Waddle, Mike Williams, Marquise Brown, all ahead of DJ Moore at this point. Like I moved Mike Williams and Marquise Brown above him. I've got Deontay Johnson and Terry McLaurin right there with him. I mean, that's the tier for me. It's DJ, Deontay, Terry, DK Metcalf. I think every analyst you talk to is probably going to put that 4 in some different order. But they're all really battling the same damn thing. And I agree with you. I think you can make the argument, that Terry, out of that group, like we probably know more about Carson Wentz than, what we could get out of the other guys' quarterbacks. They're all the bottom line is all hyper talented receivers that, like, think if they played on the Chargers or the Cowboys or the Bucks, oh my God, like these guys would be gods. But they're stuck in the absolute worst situations in the league. Not only, from a standpoint of bad quarterback play and ADP, like here are the ADPs for those quarterbacks. 33, like that means you're not doing anything. 30, 27, and 39. That's the minimum ADP for DK Metcalf, which probably is Geno Smith at this point. Like, that's terrible. And guess what? Vegas thinks they are all terrible as well. The Panthers projected to win 6 games. The Steelers at 7.5. Remember, this is a 17-game season now, so maybe not terrible, let's call that, but that's definitely below average. McLaurin at 7.5 and DK Metcalf, with the Seahawks projected at 5.5. And Rich Rebar threw something out on Twitter last week. You guys can go check it out. I've done some similar kind of research, but Rich came at it like from a different angle and actually went way further back. I think I had done it to like 2006 for all positions. Like I just wanted to know, like, basically correlating, really good teams like to, performances. And, what he basically showed is, look, if you want to really have a good shot, like at a guy having that true wide receiver 1 boom season, they pretty much need to come from a good or at least an average team. They can't come from a team that we think is going to win 6 games, 5 games. Now, if the Panthers somehow find a way to surprise us and they win 10 games, great. But, I mean, I don't see how we're going to bet on that happening.
No, and the more we talk about it, I can see why you have Marquise Brown ahead of DJ Moore. I think I will probably make that move here pretty soon. And it takes us back to, I think, a really useful conversation we just had in our Falcons preview about just taking Kyle Pitts ahead of this range of guys. Like, why take a risk on any one of these players when we see the glaring red flags, when it's like, just take Kyle Pitts, and then one of them will probably still be there in round 4. Like we have, I would rank Michael Pittman ahead of these guys, but if I can just get Terry McLaurin the next round and sign up for an elite tight end, I'm going to do that instead of reaching on DJ Moore. I'm not out on him, but it's impossible to prioritize him ahead of these guys.
I don't find myself, honestly, really clicking a lot on any of these guys. McLaurin's the one I get the most, and it's because he gets no respect whatsoever. Like his ADP on FFPC is 50 versus DJ Moore is 6 picks ahead. Deontay's 8 picks ahead. Over on Underdog, he's 22 overall at receiver. DJ Moore goes at 16. Like there's no justification for DJ Moore being that far ahead of Terry McLaurin. I think they're all in the same tier. I would take equal exposure to all of them, all things being equal. But at ADP, like I'm for sure on Terry McLaurin over the rest of the guys.
And even compared to some of the running backs, like the guy ADP-wise that you're looking at fading if you are getting DJ Moore is going to be James Conner. But it's like, if you want to take Kyle Pitts and then go back to a running back, you're still going to have guys like Cam Akers, like Travis Etienne, that I think you could argue. Breece Hall. Argue they even have similar upside to James Conner, particularly if we end up seeing Darrell Williams eating into that role a little bit.
So here's a good question, Ian. Like, I think we know the floor. You have to give DJ Moore his floor because we've seen him do it with crappy teams, right? His absolute floor is probably a wide receiver 3, assuming he's healthy, but we feel decent about him as a low-end wide receiver 2 as his floor. But think, So Breece Hall, obviously, the floor could be different. He's a rookie. A lot of things could happen. But who has the bigger ceiling, Breece Hall or DJ Moore?
I think Breece.
I do too, because what we just talked about, like you can't, you're not going to be a top 6 receiver. You have no path there with these quarterbacks.
DJ Moore just got 163 targets. Like, if it's not going to happen with that, when's it going to happen?
I know. And he's a badass, man. We are not, this is nothing against DJ Moore. We love him. This is just, the situation that, he finds himself in, and I hope it gets better for him soon. Still only going to be 25.4 years old this year.
Dude, it's one season after another with these Panthers. I mentioned 2020, and again, Teddy brought out a lot of good things, but even that wasn't enough for DJ Moore to be popping on all these studies about uncatchable target rates and what Kyle Allen did to Curtis Samuel and also DJ Moore in 2019. Bad. I mean, honestly, should be considered illegal in my humble opinion.
He cost Curtis Samuel a lot of money. I know Samuel eventually, ended up getting paid with Washington, but man, talk about being wide open in your quarterback either not seeing you or just completely missing you. I felt so bad for Curtis Samuel that year.
Over the years, I put together a lot of these mini highlights showing the open receivers and the overthrows. I did one for DJ Moore last February. I have never put together a longer or more complete one than what Curtis Samuel had to deal with in 2019. I mean, it just truly, I've never seen a player have worse stats and just being able to immediately write them off with 60, 70 seconds of film. Let's talk about the other guy. Unfortunately, not benefiting exactly from the quarterback play in Carolina. That is Robbie Anderson. Out-targeted DJ Moore in just one more game in 2020, 136-8, 118. I remember DJ was actually being used more as a field stretcher threat. Robbie getting more of the underneath stuff. Didn't really make sense then, but credit to Robbie for making do with it. Last year, DJ really took over as the true alpha, 163 targets, but Robbie still had 110. There's been some trade murmurs. Robbie is as cheap as they come right now. Do you think Robbie is worth a late round dart, Dwayne? Because even though he doesn't have great upside, he's still just 1 year removed from a legit wide receiver 2 finish. And there have been enough trade talks to think that if we end up seeing Robbie go to Green Bay or go to one of these teams that maybe still need a wide receiver, I think he would be going higher in drafts than he is right now.
Yeah, I like Robbie late, and I know I'm not allowed to talk about this, but I'm just going to briefly put it in, especially when you have Buccaneers, because you do get the week 17. And so, and he's an easy guy to get at ADP. But even if you set all of that aside, I think Robbie's ADP is it's kind of just a slap in the face at this point. He is a guy that we know can come through with a wide receiver 3 finish. But again, bad quarterbacks, all that stuff aside, I mean, he's going after guys, and I get it. You're betting on the come, right, on Mecole Hardman, hoping that, he's finally going to do it because he's with the Chiefs. Jalen Tolbert goes ahead of him, but he gets to play with the Cowboys. Alec Pierce, we have the unknown because he's the rookie. So I get why some of these guys go ahead of him, but I think especially in best ball, Robbie Anderson is a really nice pick at the end of your draft because, I don't want to pick the weeks I've got to start Robbie, and redraft. I really don't want to be picking. I don't mind having him on my roster for depth, but in best ball, I absolutely love picking Robbie Anderson.
Again, you're drafting him right at his floor. You're not going to turn around and be like, my God, if I had just not taken Robbie Anderson in round 14, my entire life and all my fantasy football dreams would have come true. I am with you there. Now, Terrace Marshall, who still seems to have some stands out there. Last year, pretty decent preseason. A lot of people were expecting big things. Got beat out by Brandon freaking Zylstra by the end of the season. Ended with a 52.9 PFF receiving grade. Dwayne, you did an article earlier this offseason looking at basically how rookies perform with this receiving grade and, how many players basically can be this bad and then go ahead and turn it on in the future. I'm going to go ahead and read all the wide receivers that qualified with under a 65 receiving grade. This is another list that maybe is not safe for work. Terrence Williams, Marlon Brown, Tyler Boyd. Okay, there's one. Kendrell Tompkins, Kendrick Bourne, Will Fuller, Robert Woods, MVS, Michael Floyd, Adam Humphries, Chester Rogers, Kenny Stills, Anthony Miller, Corey Davis, Alan Hearns, Deshaun Hamilton, Devontae Adams, Michael Gallup, D.D. Westbrook, Greg Little, Robbie Anderson, Zay Jones, James Washington, Nelson Aguilar. A couple more hits than I was maybe expecting, but even the hits weren't all that great. He has all the same offensive problems as Robbie and DJ Moore, and dude, he got beat out by Brandon freaking Zylstra. What more else do we need to say? No offense to the Zylstra family. If you guys are listening to this, shout out Brandon Zylstra. Love you, man. But Brandon freaking Zylstra. Come on. What are we doing here?
The biggest thing is Terrace Marshall was a second-round pick, right? So to be behind, someone that just hadn't have anywhere near like the capital, right, that the team had put in them, that definitely says a lot. And so to your point, most of those guys never recovered. Obviously, there's some really good names on there, like a Devontae Adams, and that's the one that I immediately get DMs about. They're like, I saw, and I appreciate you guys' ability to see the positives. I really do. That's the first thing that comes across. So Terrace Marshall's in the same tier as Devontae Adams. I'll take it. But yeah, it's just really hard to recover from being that bad. I mean, last year target share of 5% despite having a second round draft pick. Okay, great. Didn't get to play. They benched him some. Targets per route run 10%. Yards per route run, brace yourself, Ian, 0.5. Like, these are really, really bad. Now, look, if you want to use your last pick in a draft on Terrace Marshall, and just, see if he can turn it around. You're betting on his draft capital is all you're betting on it. And his preseason. Last year, like in preseason, it looked like Terrace Marshall was just like going to be pretty good. Now, we did call out that a lot of those plays were kind of like broken plays, like that PJ Walker touchdown pass, if you remember that, in the preseason, where basically like just like the corner and the linebacker both forgot about. They didn't even know Terrace Marshall was on the field, I don't think. Like, so he was wide open for this big play. And you get in the regular season, a lot of those things don't continue to happen. But I mean, look, I'm fine with him with a late dart. If you want, just see what happens in the first couple weeks. You can cut him, but just don't get your hopes up. If in Dynasty, if you have anyone offering you anything for Terrace Marshall, like, just get it, go get it.
And the other part that he did suffer a foot injury at the end of last season, so that's also not helping matters. I don't think it was super serious, but man, he was coming along as a rookie off a foot injury as well. Like, just not ideal for a wide receiver that I don't think we were necessarily expecting to just win on pure speed and like route running ability to begin with. He's supposed to be this bigger body guy capable of, providing some extra juice in the red zone. We have a starting quarterback that just threw 9 touchdowns in 12 games last year. I just don't. Terrace Marshall, maybe he does lead the Panthers in receiving touchdowns. That could seriously be like 3 or 4. Just ask DJ Moore, man. Final thing that we're going to do with these wide receivers, just a funny stat. Shout out to Russell Clay, I think was the first one that ever figured this out. DJ Moore in 2019 had exactly 1,215 total yards and 4 touchdowns. In 2020, DJ Moore had exactly 1,215 total yards and 4 touchdowns. Last year, 1,205 total yards, 4 touchdowns. So, Dwain, I don't know what your projections say, but if DJ Moore isn't between 1,205 and 1,215 yards with exactly 4 touchdowns, you're doing
They're wrong.
Let's talk. Yeah. Let's talk tight ends for maybe 30 seconds.
Just because we want to say Tommy Trembles.
Tommy Trembles would have been in, not in on Tremble, but not completely out if they had not low-key given Ian Thomas a 3-year, $16.95 million extension early on in the offseason. Panthers tight ends ranked 31st in total targets in 2020. They were dead last in 2021. Usually we can't get behind 2 tight end systems anyway, particularly not when they're in literally the most tight end verse offense in the league. And it's target share and total volume for these tight ends. There's nothing there. I like Tremble's profile. Like, he showed, I think they gave him like a jet sweep a couple times. Like, he looked all right with a couple of his opportunities. Ian Thomas
isn't
athlete,
going for sure. Yeah.
He's an athlete, but Ian Thomas is going nowhere and they're not throwing him the ball. We're out.
Yeah. There's nothing here. Anything that's going to come out of this tight end room would completely be waiver wire. But I don't think there's any, even if you're in a 20 round best ball format, like over on FFPC, where it's tight end premium, even in that format, I'm not touching either of these tight ends.
I didn't even have either guy ranked before. I threw him at the bottom of the list when I started doing my Panthers preview, but I could have easily left him unranked. Don't draft him, even if there's a 5.
Yeah, I have 35 tight ends ranked, and neither Panther tight end is in there. So once you make it past 35, my list automatically goes to your ranked 500th. So Tommy Tremble and Ian Thomas are tied at a rank of 500.
I put
with let's see here, with Isaiah Likely, with Joseph DeGuara, with James O'Shaughnessy.
Oh my!
With Blake Jarwin, free agent. So yeah, they're not ranked high.
I'm going with 41 or 42, but you know what? I might move them down.
That's
to
a big
5.
discrepancy between me and you.
I have them ranked over 440 spots higher than Mr. McFarland. All right, running through this offense, we spent way too much time on that tight end room, but Sam Darnold, Matt Corral, we are essentially out on them for the moment, particularly, we'll pay attention to see what Matt Corral can do, but just based on what we know about him as a prospect and just this overall offensive environment, it's really tough to be optimistic. Christian McCaffrey, definitely our RB2. The only question is, do we want to take him at number 2 overall versus number 5? Maybe even just number 1. Either way, spare us. For the love of God, spare us the idea that he's simply going to walk on the field and get hurt. I am knocking on wood. As I say that, please don't get hurt. We love watching you play, Christian McCaffrey. If that does happen, maybe you should be using a late round pick on Deontay Foreman, who at the moment profiles as the better handcuff ahead of Chuba Hubbard. Wide receiver, DJ Moore, firmly there in the wide receiver 2 mix. He's a fantastic player. We love DJ Moore. The guy cannot buy even a decent quarterback under center. Because of that, he has a wide receiver 1 profile. Got to treat him as a wide receiver 2 based on the quarterback. Robbie Anderson, fine enough late round dart. Terrence Marshall to a much lesser extent. And fade the shit out of these tight ends. Sound right, Dwayne?
Yes, that is really good. So, Girl Scout. Coming to the door, Ian.
Oh, no.
You only get to draft 1 fantasy team this season, and you have pick 2. Is it CMC, or are you passing him? You only get 1 draft this whole season. Because a lot of people, this is a question I get, because a lot of people are like, hey, it's cool that you guys get to do 20 and spread it around, or 50, but I have 1. So I'm going to try and incorporate this more, because I asked myself the same thing.
Number 2 overall pick, I'm taking Christian McCaffrey.
I am too. If I get 1 draft, I'm taking CMC too. I'm with you. We're on the same page.
Same page. Great day to be great. Christian McCaffrey, only behind Jonathan Taylor. Why the hell not? At Dwain McFarland on Twitter, you can find his top 150 live on PFF.com. I have all the team previews continuing to go out, and we will be back next week covering, I don't know, what division is up next? AFC South? We already did them. We already did that.
Yeah, no, we go to the
West, AFC West.
Yeah, AFC West.
Ooh, that's Liddy City. Let's go.
Yeah, the whole thing's lit. Yep.
Lit. Love it. I don't know if we've ever said lit as much on this podcast if we have in the last 5 seconds. Great ending for Dwayne, Javi, and thanks as always for tuning in to PFF Fantasy Football Podcast. Until next time, take care, everybody.